On the evening of the 18th of May 1818, Phoebe Wainwright noticed the frightened young woman before she noticed the Duke. Bramwell House glittered with candles, polished mirrors, white gloves, and the particular tension of a Mayfair ballroom where every unmarried daughter was expected to look effortless while being measured from across the room. Phoebe stood near the edge of it, all beside her older married relation, respectable enough to be welcomed and old enough at 31 to have stopped believing every invitation concealed a promise. She possessed a modest annuity left by her mother, sufficient to give her choices, if not influence. Society had long since decided what those choices meant. Some called her sensible. Others called her resigned. A few called her unfortunate when they thought she could not hear. Phoebe had learned that being overlooked could be painful, but it also allowed one to notice what everyone else missed. The young woman near the terrace doors could not have been more than 19. Her face was composed badly, which was often more revealing than tears. One hand clutched her fan, the other held a narrow cream card so tightly that its edge had bent against her glove. Her mother stood close beside her, whispering with urgency disguised as encouragement. "You mustn't lose your nerve now. Lord Edwin has already arranged everything." The girl shook her head. "I don't want to go in there." "You wanted the introduction." "I thought I did." Phoebe saw the girl's breath shorten. Nobody else seemed to notice. Across the room, couples were taking their places. Gentlemen were laughing too loudly, and Lady Henrietta Bramwell stood near the supper-room entrance in pale blue silk, receiving attention as if the house itself had been arranged around her. Phoebe crossed the few steps between herself and the girl. "Forgive me," she said quietly. "Would you like to sit down?" The mother looked startled. The girl looked grateful enough to make Phoebe wish she had arrived sooner. "Yes," she whispered. Phoebe guided them toward a small alcove beside the terrace doors, far enough from the central crush that the girl could breathe without feeling watched. "There is no need to explain anything to me," Phoebe said. "Take your time." The girl's mother pressed her lips together. "We do not have time," Lord Edwin said. The smaller supper room would be opened after the next dance. Phoebe glanced at the cream card in the girl's hand. A handwritten number marked its center, 47. At the upper corner, someone had cut a tiny crescent-shaped notch. It did not resemble an ordinary dance card. "Is that where you are expected to go?" Phoebe asked. The mother hesitated. "It is only an arrangement." "What sort of arrangement?" "A private introduction." The mother's voice dropped further, "To the Duke of Cottesham." The girl closed her eyes. Phoebe said nothing for a moment. She had heard enough stories about Matthew Montford, Duke of Cottesham, to know the outline, if not the man. He was wealthy, unmarried, 39, and famous for declining every attempt to push marriage toward him. Some women admired his wit. Some mothers despised it. Some called his refusals cruel because he delivered them with a smile. Phoebe had never met him. "Do you want the introduction?" she asked the girl. "Not like this." Her mother's hand tightened around her sleeve. "We have already paid Lord Edwin." Phoebe turned toward the woman. "Paid him?" A flush rose along the mother's throat. 40 guineas. He called it a subscription toward selected suppers, he said. Families without the proper connections sometimes needed help being placed where introductions might occur naturally. Nothing about the words sounded natural. "And Lady Henrietta?" Phoebe asked. She said it was entirely usual. The girl looked down at number 47. "She told me what color His Grace prefers, what subjects he dislikes, when I should laugh, she said I must not seem eager. Her voice thinned. I have been thinking about appearing not eager for so long that I cannot remember whether I wish to meet him at all. Phoebe reached into her reticule and removed a small silver vinaigrette engraved with a worn fern. It had belonged to her mother, who had once said crowded rooms were difficult enough without the added humiliation of everyone seeing that they were difficult. Phoebe opened it and held it out. This sometimes helps. The girl accepted it. After a careful breath, then another, the panic began to ease from her face. Thank you. There is nothing to thank me for. Phoebe waited until the girl's breathing steadied before adding, If you do not want to go into that supper room, then do not go. The mother stared at her. Miss Wainwright, 40 guineas is not a small sum. No, Phoebe kept her voice gentle, but neither is agreeing to something because you are afraid of wasting it. The girl looked at her mother. Please. Something in that single word defeated whatever argument the woman had prepared. Her shoulders lowered. Very well. The girl exhaled. Phoebe felt no triumph, only relief. She had just taken the returned vinaigrette when she became aware that someone was watching. Lord Edwin Bramwell stood beyond the nearest group of dancers, speaking to an elderly gentleman while looking directly toward the alcove. His expression was pleasant, his eyes were not. A few yards farther away, Lady Henrietta followed his gaze. She saw the girl still holding number 47. Then she saw Phoebe beside her. Henrietta's fan paused once against her wrist. Phoebe slipped the vinaigrette safely back into her reticule. Stay here until you feel ready to return, she told the girl. You owe no one a performance. A servant's staff struck the floor near the ballroom entrance. Conversation shifted at once. The announcement carried cleanly through the room. His Grace, the Duke of Cottesham. The effect was almost comical in its completeness. Heads turned, fans stilled, mothers straightened. Young women adjusted posture without seeming to move at all. Even gentlemen glanced toward the doorway to see whether the notoriously elusive Duke looked inclined to be amused that evening. Phoebe did not turn. The girl beside her had gone tense again, and Phoebe remained where she was, speaking quietly about the terrace beyond the glass doors and the cool air outside. If she wished to step away later, Matthew Montford entered Bramwell House already expecting to be watched. He had spent enough seasons enduring choreographed introductions to recognize the moment a room rearranged itself around his title. He greeted his host. He bowed to an elderly countess. He answered a remark from a gentleman near the door. Then he noticed the woman facing the wrong direction. At first, it was merely unusual. A dark-haired woman stood near the terrace alcove, with her attention fixed on a younger lady who looked distressed. The older woman's gown was elegant without announcing expense. Nothing in her posture suggested calculation. She was not glancing toward him through lowered lashes. She was not pretending indifference while ensuring that he saw it. She appeared genuinely occupied by someone else's discomfort. Matthew looked away and completed another greeting. When he looked back, she still had not turned. Lady Henrietta approached him with the easy confidence of long familiarity. Your Grace, you are late enough to make half the room believe suspense was intentional. Only half? Your reputation is declining. Normally, he would have answered her and allowed himself to be drawn into whatever introduction she had arranged next. Instead, his gaze returned to the alcove. Who is that? Henrietta followed his eyes. Her hesitation lasted barely a second. Miss Phoebe Wainwright. I don't know her. No. Something in Henrietta's tone made the word sound preferable. Matthew watched Phoebe hand the younger woman back to her mother, only after the girl appeared steady. He could not hear what was said. He could see, however, that Phoebe did not look toward him even once. Curiosity, sharpened by years of being pursued, became something close to amusement, then interest. Matthew excused himself from Henrietta. He passed a cluster of mothers who had already begun calculating proximity. He passed two young women who suddenly found reasons to stand straighter. He crossed the ballroom toward the one woman who had not turned to see him enter. Phoebe became aware of the movement only when conversation around the alcove changed. She looked up. The Duke of Cottesham was standing before her. His expression held restrained humor, but his eyes were more observant than she expected. He bowed. "Miss Wainwright, I believe you're the only person in this room who didn't notice my arrival." Phoebe had expected the Duke of Cottesham to possess the kind of confidence that filled silence for other people. She had not expected him to wait for her answer. Around them, the ballroom continued its careful performance. Music gathered again near the musicians' gallery. Fans opened. Glances traveled with the speed of whispered scandal. Matthew Montford appeared aware of all of it and interested in none of it. Phoebe met his gaze. "I noticed, Your Grace, there was simply so much attention already devoted to your arrival that I thought the room could spare mine." For one heartbeat, his expression remained perfectly controlled. Then amusement touched his mouth. "A practical distribution of resources." Exactly. I confess I have never heard my entrance described as an excess of available attention. Perhaps no one wished to be unkind. "And you do, only accurate," Matthew laughed softly. It was not the polished laugh Phoebe had heard noblemen use. When a woman had said something, they meant to forgive because she was pretty. It sounded surprised, that unsettled her more than offense would have done. He glanced toward the young woman beside Mrs. Alderton. The girl had regained enough composure to stand straight, though one gloved hand remained closed around the cream card. Matthew's eyes returned to Phoebe. "May I ask what occupied you so completely?" "You may ask, and?" I may decline to answer. One eyebrow rose. "You negotiate conversation rather severely, Miss Wainwright. Only when the subject belongs to someone else." He followed her meaning without demanding the details. That, too, surprised her. "Then I shall attempt a safer question." The musicians began the opening measures of the next set. "Will you dance with me?" Phoebe heard the small shift around them before she allowed herself to react. The Duke of Cottesham asking an unmarried woman of 31 to dance was not improper. It was merely unexpected enough to become public property before the first figure had finished. She looked toward Mrs. Alderton's daughter. The girl met her eyes. Phoebe did not ask aloud. She did not need to. The young woman gave the smallest nod, then moved closer to her mother. Only then did Phoebe turn back to Matthew. "Yes, Your Grace." He offered his hand. Phoebe placed her gloved fingers in his. The contact was entirely formal, exactly what the dance required, yet she became conscious of the steadiness of his hand and of how carefully he adjusted his pace to hers as they joined the set. Matthew, for his part, noticed that Phoebe neither trembled nor brightened under the attention of the room. She simply took her place opposite him, as if dancing with a duke required the same courtesy as dancing with any other gentleman and no additional gratitude. "You looked back before accepting," he said when the figure brought them close enough for conversation. "Yes, to make certain your friend did not need you." "She is not my friend." Matthew regarded her. "That seems to make the concern more unusual." "Why?" Most people reserve inconvenience for those they know. Then most people are missing useful opportunities to be decent. The next movement separated them. When they came together again, Matthew said, "You make virtue sound almost unfashionable. I find announcing it usually makes it so." His smile deepened. Phoebe wished she did not notice. She also wished the room were not noticing everything else. Lady Henrietta stood beyond the dancers beside an arrangement of white lilies, her fan lifted near one shoulder. When Matthew turned during the figure, Henrietta shifted the fan once, a deliberate movement meant for him. He saw it. Phoebe knew he saw it because his gaze rested there for the briefest moment. Then he turned back to Phoebe and continued the dance. Henrietta's fan stopped moving. "Do you often ignore signals from hostesses?" Phoebe asked. Matthew's mouth twitched. "Do you often observe signals not intended for you?" "Frequently. Dangerous habit. Only for people with secrets." "Then I shall be on my guard. I had assumed you already were." That silenced him for half a beat. The humor remained, but something more thoughtful entered his expression. "You have formed an opinion of me. London has done most of the work. And London says that you have turned away enough eligible women to make refusal your principal accomplishment." Cruel, inaccurate, he considered. Not entirely. Phoebe almost smiled. "Then I withdraw nothing." The dance carried them apart again. Matthew found himself watching her return through the figures. She was not beautiful in the fragile, breathless fashion society, praised in girls just entering the season. There was calm in her face, intelligence in the way her attention shifted, and a refusal to flatter that should have irritated him. Instead, he found himself wanting to discover whether it had limits. When the set ended, he returned her exactly to the place from which he had taken her. Mrs. Alderton's daughter had moved nearer the terrace doors. As Phoebe approached, the girl adjusted her glove, and the cream card slipped free. It fell face up on the polished floor between them. 47. Phoebe bent before a servant could reach it. She saw again the narrow cream stock and the small crescent cut in the corner, but she did not turn it over or examine it further. She held it out immediately. "You dropped this." The girl took it with visible relief. "Thank you." Matthew had seen the exchange from a few feet away. "A dance card?" he asked. Phoebe looked at him. "It belongs to her." The answer was not really an answer. He recognized that she knew it. "You are remarkably committed to privacy. It is inexpensive and useful, unlike most fashionable principles." "Exactly." Before Matthew could respond, a gentleman passing with two companions slowed just enough to be heard. Mr. Ashburn was known for the confidence of a man whose wit improved considerably in his own memory after he spoke. "Cottesham," he said, glancing at Phoebe, "your tastes grow charitable." A woman overlooked for a decade ought to inspire gratitude in even the hardest heart. The insult was delivered lightly enough that society could pretend it had been humor. Phoebe felt the familiar old pressure behind her ribs. She had heard variations before. At 31, a woman's unmarried state became communal evidence, available for interpretation by anyone with a tongue. She did not look away. Matthew did not raise his voice. "You mistake me, Ashburn," the gentleman smiled uncertainly. "Do I?" "Completely. Charity requires condescension. I have found Miss Wainwright's conversation distinctly lacking in it." One of Ashburn's companions coughed into his hand. Ashburn's smile thinned. "Of course. And if being overlooked improves conversation," Matthew added pleasantly, "several gentlemen in this room may yet have excellent futures." That ended it. Ashburn moved on. Phoebe turned to Matthew. Was the final sentence necessary? No. Then why say it? Because I enjoyed it. At least you are honest. Occasionally. Something in his eyes invited her to laugh. Phoebe allowed him a small smile instead. It affected him more than the laughter of half the ballroom had done upon his entrance. Lady Henrietta saw that too. A few minutes later, duty drew Matthew toward an elderly duchess near the card-room. Phoebe remained with her relation and the Aldertons, unaware that across the ballroom, Henrietta had already reached Edwin. Why was number 47 removed from the sequence? She asked, beneath the cover of renewed music. Edwin's gaze moved toward Phoebe. Because Miss Wainwright interfered. She saw the card. She saw enough. Henrietta closed her fan, and Cottesham crossed the room for her. Edwin's expression hardened almost imperceptibly. Then, if she asks questions, she becomes a problem. By 3 o'clock on the 19th May, Phoebe Wainwright had learned that a duke's calling card could produce more agitation in a respectable London drawing-room than a broken window. Her older married relation turned the small rectangle over twice, as though the engraved name might alter beneath inspection. He called specifically for you. Phoebe continued arranging correspondence at the writing table. So, the servant informed me. You don't sound surprised. I am trying not to encourage you. Too late. Phoebe almost smiled. The previous evening had already become the sort of event society enlarged through repetition. The Duke of Cottesham had crossed a ballroom to speak to her. He had asked her to dance. Mr. Ashburn had been put neatly in his place. By breakfast, 3 acquaintances had found reasons to inquire whether Phoebe had enjoyed Bramwell House. None had asked whether the frightened young woman near the terrace doors had recovered. That difference remained with Phoebe longer than the dance. Matthew arrived precisely when propriety expected him. He entered the drawing-room with the ease of a man accustomed to being received everywhere. Yet he bowed first to Phoebe's relation and waited until she invited him to sit. Nothing about his manner suggested the reckless romantic significance London had already begun attaching to one dance. Phoebe appreciated that more than she intended. Miss Wainwright, he said, I hope I have not arrived during an important dispute over Italian landscapes. Phoebe glanced at the book beside her. Only a disagreement between the author and geography. Serious, then. Very. Her relation lowered her embroidery to conceal amusement. Matthew's gaze returned to Phoebe. I considered asking whether your young acquaintance was well after last evening. Phoebe's expression changed by only a fraction. He saw it. And then, she asked, then I remembered that you told me another person's distress was not yours to give away. The room seemed unexpectedly quieter. You remembered that? I was listening. A dangerous habit. Your Grace. You warned me about those already. The faint humor in his eyes did not diminish the seriousness beneath it. So I will not ask you to violate the principle merely because curiosity has acquired a title. Phoebe felt something shift inside her. Men had remembered compliments she had given them. They had remembered whether she preferred quadrilles or country dances. One had once remembered the color of a ribbon she had worn and seemed astonished when the achievement failed to move her. Matthew had remembered a boundary she had drawn for someone else's sake. Then I thank you, she said, for not asking, for understanding why I would not answer. His gaze rested on her a moment longer than ordinary courtesy required. That seems a very inexpensive form of consideration. Phoebe thought of the previous evening. Privacy often is, and useful. She looked at him sharply. He smiled. I do listen. Her relation found sudden interest in a misplaced stitch Matthew shifted the conversation toward harmless matters. He asked whether Phoebe truly disliked Italian travel writing, or merely inaccurate Italian travel writing. She informed him that enthusiasm did not excuse a gentleman from placing Florence on the wrong side of a journey. He confessed he had known several men who considered geography an affront to imagination. The exchange remained light, but beneath it, Phoebe sensed deliberate restraint. He did not mention the cream card he had seen fall. He did not ask why the young woman had looked frightened. He did not ask why Lord Edwin had been watching the alcove. When he rose to leave, he paused beside Phoebe's chair. "One question, I believe, belongs entirely to you. That sounds suspiciously careful. Did Ashburn's remark trouble you?" Phoebe could have dismissed it. She had done so with worse. Instead, she said, appearing wounded is not the same as being unharmed. Matthew's expression lost its amusement. "No," he said quietly. "I suppose it isn't." He bowed over no hand and asked for no promise of another dance. "Good afternoon, Miss Wainwright." "Your Grace." After he left, Phoebe's relation waited until the front door closed below before saying, "That man came here intending not to ask questions." Phoebe looked down at the book she had not read for several minutes. Apparently, for a duke, that is nearly unnatural. Do not become sentimental. I wouldn't dare. Before 5 o'clock, another visitor arrived. This time, Phoebe stood before the servant had finished, announcing Mrs. Alderton and her daughter. The young woman looked better than she had at Bramwell House, though embarrassment still colored her face. Mrs. Alderton carried herself with the brittle determination of someone who had spent the day regretting both an action and the circumstances that had made it seem reasonable. Phoebe's relation remained with them. Tea was offered and barely touched. "Miss Wainwright, Mrs." Alderton began. "My daughter insisted we come." The girl looked at her mother. "You eventually." Phoebe gave them time. Mrs. Alderton opened her reticule, but did not yet remove anything. "My husband was approached during the winter by Lord Edwin Bramwell." Not formally. There was no contract. He spoke of selected suppers at Bramwell House and the expenses of arranging smaller gatherings for suitable families. "And the 40 guineas?" Phoebe asked. Mrs. Alderton flushed. "We paid Lord Edwin directly." The daughter's hands tightened in her lap. "He said it wasn't payment for his grace." "What did he say it was for?" "Access," Mrs. Alderton admitted, though he used prettier words. She looked toward her daughter. "We were told that if she attended certain evenings, she would be placed where an introduction to the Duke could occur without appearing arranged." The girl gave a humorless little laugh, except every part of it was arranged. Mrs. Alderton continued. "Lady Henrietta told us it was entirely usual. She said families without old connections often contributed toward the cost of private suppers." "Did she take the money?" Phoebe asked. "No, Lord Edwin did." Phoebe kept that distinction carefully in mind. "And the card?" The young woman reached into her glove and removed the narrow cream slip Phoebe had seen the night before. Number 47 remained handwritten in the center. The crescent notch marked the upper corner. "Lord Edwin sent a message this morning asking for it back." Phoebe looked from the card to the girl. "Did he say why?" "He called it Bramwell property." "And is it?" "I don't know." The girl swallowed. "He gave it to me before the ball and said servants would understand where I should be moved after the dance. If anyone questioned me, I was to show it." Mrs. Alderton's voice tightened. This morning his message said the card had not been used as intended and should be returned. Phoebe felt the first true shape of the unease she had carried since the ballroom. Not proof of anything larger, not yet. But the card was no accidental token. It had controlled movement. It had a number. Edwin wanted it back. "Why bring it to me?" she asked. The girl answered before her mother could. "Because I don't want him to have it." Phoebe said nothing, and because you were the only person last night who told me I could simply refuse. Her eyes lowered. Everyone else spoke, as if the money meant I had already agreed. Mrs. Alderton drew a breath. "We thought you might keep it." Phoebe looked at the cream card. "If I keep it, I may eventually need to show it to someone." "Not without asking us," the girl said quickly. No, Phoebe's answer was immediate. "Not without your permission." Mrs. Alderton studied her. "You would agree to that?" "It is your experience. The card does not make it mine." The young woman extended it. Phoebe did not take it yet. "Are you certain?" "Yes." Phoebe looked at Mrs. Alderton. "And you?" The woman hesitated only a moment. Yes, only then did Phoebe accept slip 47. The card was lighter than she expected. Such a small thing for so much anxiety. She turned it once between her fingers, careful not to bend the cream stock. The handwritten number was ordinary. The crescent notch was not. "I will keep it," she said, "and I will not show it to anyone without your permission." The girl released a breath. Phoebe placed the slip inside her own card case and closed it. Mrs. Alderton rose soon afterward, looking no less ashamed of the 40 guineas, but noticeably less alone in that shame. When they had gone, Phoebe returned to the writing table. Her fingers rested briefly on the closed card case. The Duke of Cottesham had seen number 47 fall the previous evening, but he did not know what it meant. Lord Edwin knew exactly what it meant, and he already wanted it returned. Phoebe looked toward the door through which Matthew had left hours earlier. For the first time, the two facts seemed as though they might eventually have to meet. On the afternoon of the 23rd May, Phoebe Wainwright carried slip 47 into Montford House with the uncomfortable knowledge that trust weighed far more than cream-colored card stock. Mrs. Alderton and her daughter had sent permission that morning, after Phoebe wrote to explain that the Duke of Cottesham himself might be the only person able to say whether such numbered introductions had ever been authorized in his name. Their answer had been cautious but clear. Phoebe might show him the card. She might describe how it had been used. She was not to surrender it, and the family did not yet wish to be identified publicly. Phoebe had promised both conditions. Her older married relation accompanied her to Montford House and remained in the drawing room when Matthew entered, an arrangement accepted without comment. He greeted them properly, but his attention settled on Phoebe almost at once. "Your note suggested something more serious than Italian geography. Most things are. You wound me. I had begun to think our disagreement historic. It was never our disagreement. You wisely agreed with me. I remember the afternoon differently." Phoebe placed her card case on the small table between them. The humor in Matthew's face faded when she opened it. "You saw this fall at Bramwell House." She removed slip 47 and laid it flat without pushing it toward him. "I did." His gaze fixed on the handwritten number. "The young woman who carried it and her mother have given me permission to show it to you." Matthew did not reach for the card, and permission to tell me what it means. "Yes, within limits. Then I will respect them." Phoebe explained only what the Aldertons had authorized. 40 guineas paid directly to Lord Edwin Bramwell. A select supper subscription, a promised moment when the daughter would be moved into a smaller room and introduced to Matthew as if the encounter had occurred naturally. Lady Henrietta had told them that such arrangements were ordinary, for families without sufficient connections. Edwin had given the daughter number 47 and instructed her to show it if servants questioned where she was going. The morning after the ball, he had requested its return because it had not been used as intended. Matthew listened without interruption. When Phoebe finished, he looked at the card again. I have never seen one of these before. You are certain? Completely. And you have never authorized Lord Edwin to accept money for introductions to you? A sharper expression entered his eyes. No. Lady Henrietta? No. Phoebe watched him absorb the distinction between suspicion and fact. The card itself does not name you, she said, nor does it say what the 40 guineas purchased, which means it proves less than the story attached to it. Exactly. Matthew glanced up. You sound disappointed that I understand evidence. I am trying to adjust. The corner of his mouth moved, but the amusement vanished almost immediately. 40 guineas to be maneuvered into my path. His voice cooled. A substantial price for disappointment. Phoebe stiffened. That is an easy conclusion. Is it inaccurate? Possibly. They paid for access to an unmarried duke. Yes, that suggests a certain intention. It suggests they believed the arrangement mattered. Matthew leaned back slightly. You are determined to make this difficult. No. I am determined not to make it simple, merely because simplicity is comfortable. His eyes narrowed with interest rather than anger. What am I making simple? The women. Silence followed. Phoebe continued before caution could turn the conversation polite. You see a mother paying 40 guineas and conclude ambition. Perhaps there was ambition. I cannot know. But the daughter did not look triumphant when I found her. She looked frightened. She could have refused. She did, eventually. Yes, Phoebe held his gaze. After money had been paid, after she had been told what to wear, what subjects to mention, when to enter the room, and how not to seem eager. That does not make her helpless. It does mean her choice was not made in an empty room. Matthew's jaw shifted. For a moment, Phoebe thought he would retreat into wit. He did not. You believe I am judging her unfairly. I think you are being comfortable. His brows rose. That is worse. It was meant to be. He looked away toward the long windows. When he spoke again, his tone had changed. There was a red-haired girl at the Dalrymples last year. Phoebe waited. She appeared in the card room after supper. No one else had any reason to be there. She spoke about Cottesham's stables as if someone had given her 3 facts to memorize. What happened? I left. He looked down at the card. Another young woman was sent into a conservatory during a musicale. She began talking before I had properly entered. Then she forgot what she intended to say and cried. Phoebe said nothing. I assumed the tears were humiliation because I would not encourage her. Did you ask? No. Matthew's answer came more quietly. There was also a widow, older than the others. She became furious when I refused an invitation to walk with her. At you? I thought so. Perhaps. Phoebe paused. Or perhaps she was furious at whoever had promised the walk would happen. Matthew's gaze returned to hers. The idea clearly displeased him because it fit too well. 3 women, he said. 3 different houses? Yes. Any common host? No. Common guest. He did not answer immediately. Phoebe saw memory working behind his expression. Henrietta was present at all 3. That did not surprise Phoebe. And Edwin? Matthew went still before each introduction. The room seemed to contract around the card between them. Phoebe looked down at number 47. Was he near you, by chance? At the time, I assumed so. And now? Matthew exhaled through his nose. Now I am remembering that Edwin has an irritating habit of involving himself in supper arrangements. Meaning, he likes to decide who is moved where, which smaller rooms are opened, whether another table should be laid. I thought it was vanity. Younger sons are sometimes excessively grateful for any authority that resembles importance. Phoebe's eyes sharpened. Did he handle money? I do not know. Then we do not say he did. Matthew looked at her, and something almost approving entered his face. You are remarkably strict with suspicion. Suspicion grows faster than truth. Someone should be. He leaned forward, forearms resting lightly on his knees. May I make inquiries? Phoebe did not answer at once. What kind? Quiet ones. I can ask my secretary what invitations or supper arrangements Edwin has been connected with. I can speak to people without mentioning the family who gave you this card. No servants dismissed because they failed to remember something useful. Agreed. No summons to the young woman. Agreed. No confrontation with Lord Edwin or Lady Henrietta yet. Matthew's mouth tightened. That condition I like least, which is why I included it. A flicker of humor returned, naturally, and the card remains with me. I had not asked for it. You considered it. I did. Then we understand each other. For the first time since the conversation began, the tension eased. Phoebe reached toward slip 47 to return it to her case at exactly the moment. Matthew moved as though to examine the crescent notch more closely. Their hands stopped less than an inch apart, neither touched. Matthew looked first at the card, then at Phoebe. Apparently, evidence is dangerous at close range, only when dukes forget instructions. I was about to ask permission, convenient timing. A quiet laugh escaped him. To Phoebe's annoyance, one escaped her too. Matthew withdrew his hand first. Phoebe picked up the card and returned it safely to her case. When she closed the clasp, the lightness between them disappeared again. Matthew stood and crossed toward the mantel, thinking. 3 encounters, he said, all after supper. Henrietta found reasons for me to remain in each house longer than I intended. Once it was a charity subscription, once an estate acquaintance, once a supposed message from a mutual friend. Phoebe rose more slowly. And Edwin? Matthew turned toward her. There was no amusement left in his face now. Edwin was present before every one of those introductions, and I remember something else. Each time, he was the man telling servants which room I would be in. On the 27th May, Montford House held only 16 guests for supper, which was few enough for conversation to matter, and many enough for propriety to remain comfortably visible. Phoebe arrived with her older married relation shortly before 8, and discovered that Matthew had placed neither of them conspicuously near himself. She appreciated that at once. A man less attentive might have announced his interest by rearranging the table. Matthew had apparently decided that restraint could be practiced even in seating plans. He greeted Phoebe with the same formal courtesy he offered everyone else. But when their eyes met, something private passed between them. 4 days earlier, slip 47 had lain on a table between them. Tonight, it remained safely in Phoebe's card case at home, untouched and unseen. Nothing about the room suggested inquiry. Lady Henrietta Bramwell was present in pale ivory silk, composed as ever. Lord Edwin stood near the mantel before supper, discussing racing subscriptions with a gentleman who seemed only half interested. If either Bramwell knew that Matthew had begun making quiet inquiries, neither showed it. Phoebe noticed, however, that Edwin watched the servants with unusual attention. He corrected one footman about the placement of wine before the man had even reached the table. Matthew noticed too. Their eyes met briefly across the room. Neither spoke of it. During supper, Phoebe found herself seated near enough to Matthew for conversation, but not so near that anyone could claim design. They began with Italian landscapes, perhaps because difficult truths required an ordinary door. "I have reconsidered your criticism," Matthew said. "That sounds dangerous. I now believe a man may place Florence on the wrong side of a journey if he writes with sufficient confidence." Phoebe looked at him. "Then you have learned nothing. I feared you might say that. You should fear accuracy." "I am discovering that." The exchange brought a faint smile to her mouth, but Matthew did not press the advantage. He waited until the conversation around them shifted toward a discussion of horses before lowering his voice. "I remembered more." Phoebe's attention sharpened. About Edwin, about the women. That answer was not what she expected. Matthew looked toward his wineglass rather than at her. "At first, I was trying to remember rooms, which houses, which suppers, whether Edwin was present. Then I realized I could remember details I had dismissed at the time." "What kind of details?" One woman kept twisting a ring on her finger. Another looked toward the door every time someone entered, as though she hoped to escape. "The widow I told you about was angry before she spoke to me, not after." His expression tightened. "I thought I was remembering inconveniences. Now I am wondering how many of those inconveniences were people." Phoebe let the silence remain for a moment. "That is a better question. You are not going to congratulate me for reaching it. No, cruel woman. You have survived worse." Matthew almost smiled, but the humor faded before it fully formed. Supper ended without further discussion. Later in the drawing room, the guests separated into small conversational groups. Phoebe's older relation joined two ladies near the pianoforte. Henrietta occupied herself with a baronet's wife. Edwin disappeared briefly toward the passage that led to the servants' side of the house. Matthew approached Phoebe near a small table beneath a landscape painting. The room remained open and well attended. "May I ask you something that has nothing to do with cards?" he said. "You may ask. There is that warning again. You ignored it once successfully. I am trying to build character." Phoebe glanced at him. "Proceed." Matthew's expression grew serious. "You said the other day that I was being comfortable. I remember I disliked it. I remember that too. You were right." The admission came without decoration. Phoebe waited. Matthew looked toward the room, not because he feared being overheard, but as though the distance helped him speak. "My parents had what society considered an excellent marriage. They agreed on estates, politics, guests, duties, and every public obligation. They never raised their voices. They never embarrassed one another. People admired them for 26 years. And privately, they were almost perfect strangers." His jaw shifted. "My mother could enter a room she hated and make everyone believe she was delighted to be there. My father respected her for it. I think he even believed respect was enough." Phoebe's face softened despite herself. Matthew continued. "When she died, people called their marriage stable. I remember thinking that stability was a poor word for two people who had learned never to ask anything difficult of each other. So you decided not to marry. I decided I would rather be thought selfish than become that." "And the wit?" His eyes met hers. The wit came later. He gave the faintest shrug. "Refusal became easier when everyone expected it. If I made the room laugh quickly enough, no one asked whether I was lonely. Eventually, I stopped asking myself." Phoebe looked at him for a long moment. This was not the Duke who had crossed a ballroom because a woman failed to notice him. This was a man describing the architecture of his own defenses and allowing another person to see where the walls had cracked. "That sounds exhausting," she said. It was efficient. Those are not the same thing. No. The answer was quiet. Phoebe opened her reticule, more for something to do with her hands than from need. Her fingers brushed the silver vinaigrette engraved with its tiny fern. Matthew noticed. "The one from Bramwell House?" She drew it out. "Yes. You carry it everywhere, nearly." "Why?" Phoebe turned the small silver object between her fingers. "It belonged to my mother." Crowded rooms sometimes overwhelmed her. Nothing serious. She simply disliked the embarrassment of being observed while uncomfortable. Matthew's expression changed. So she carried that, and offered it to other women more often than she used it herself. Phoebe smiled faintly. She said discomfort was unpleasant enough without an audience. That sounds familiar. It should. He looked at the vinaigrette, then at her. "Is that why you gave it to the young woman at Bramwell House?" "Yes." "You knew what she needed because someone once gave the same kindness to you?" Phoebe shook her head. "Not exactly. My mother taught me that a small discomfort can become unbearable when everyone insists on watching." Matthew's gaze remained on her. "And what has everyone insisted on watching with you?" The question struck more deeply than she expected. She could have answered lightly. Instead, she placed the vinaigrette back into her reticule. "My failure to marry." Matthew did not interrupt. "At 31, society assumes an unmarried woman must be one of two things: desperate to be chosen, or pretending she never wanted to be. Which are you?" Phoebe's brows lifted. "That is very direct. I can retreat." "No." She considered the truth before giving it. "Neither." Matthew waited. "I would like love if it came with respect. I would like companionship if it did not require me to become grateful for being selected, but I would rather remain unmarried than audition for a life." Something in Matthew's face became very still. "That sounds very like refusal. Only of the wrong thing." The room seemed to recede around them. Matthew glanced down. Phoebe's hand rested lightly on the carved back of the chair beside her. He looked at it, then at her face. "May I?" The question was soft enough that only she heard it. Phoebe knew exactly what he meant. She also knew there was no pressure in it. "Yes." Matthew placed his hand over hers. Briefly, his palm was warm through her glove. He did not move his thumb. He did not close his fingers possessively. He simply covered her hand, as if acknowledging something she had trusted him enough to say. Phoebe did not withdraw. For several quiet breaths, neither spoke. Then Matthew released her first. "Thank you," he said, "for permission, for not making honesty feel like surrender." Phoebe's throat tightened unexpectedly. Before she could answer, a senior servant appeared at Matthew's side with visible reluctance. "Your Grace, forgive the interruption." Matthew turned. "What is it?" "A messenger has arrived from Mrs. Hensley. He says the matter concerns an arrangement made through Lord Edwin Bramwell." Phoebe and Matthew exchanged one look. The servant continued. "Mrs. Hensley asks when her daughter's promised supper introduction is to be honored. She says the 35 guineas have already been paid." Matthew's face lost every trace of warmth. Phoebe felt the evening change around them. Mrs. Hensley could not know what Mrs. Alderton had told her. Yet the language was nearly identical. Matthew looked toward Edwin, who had just re-entered the room from the servants' passage. "Do not answer the messenger yet," he said quietly. Then, without taking his eyes from Edwin, he added to Phoebe, "One card might have been an oddity." Phoebe's fingers closed around the clasp of her reticule. "A second family using the same arrangement is not." On the 2nd of June, Matthew arranged the meeting in a smaller morning room at Montford House, where 6 chairs, 1 tea table, and an open door made the gathering feel less like an inquiry than an uncomfortable conversation no one could avoid any longer. Phoebe arrived with her older married relation shortly before Mrs. Hensley and her daughter. Matthew had sent no formal summons. He had asked whether they wished to come, and he had made it clear that refusal would alter nothing. Mrs. Hensley entered, carrying the strained composure of a woman who had spent several days deciding whether embarrassment was safer than uncertainty. Her daughter appeared younger than Phoebe had expected. She could not have been more than 20. Matthew greeted them without mentioning the Duke's name, the payment, or the card until everyone was seated. "Mrs. Hensley," he said, "you sent a message to my house on the 27th asking when your daughter's promised supper introduction would be honored." Mrs. Hensley flushed. "Yes, Your Grace. Before we continue, I want you to understand that you are not required to tell me anything you would rather keep private." The woman looked surprised. "Then why did you ask us here?" "Because someone used my name in an arrangement I did not authorize, and I would like to know what happened. But I will not correct one misuse of power by creating another." Phoebe said nothing. Matthew did not look toward her for approval. The words had become his own. Mrs. Hensley drew a careful breath. "Lord Edwin approached my husband in April. He said the Bramwells were arranging selected suppers for families who did not always have the advantage of old connections." "Did he say I approved them?" Matthew asked. "Not directly." "What did he say?" The daughter answered, "That Lady Henrietta knew how best to prevent introductions from feeling forced." Her voice was low. "She told me you disliked being pursued." Matthew's expression changed slightly. "That part is true. She also told me what topics you found tiresome when I should enter the smaller supper room, and where I ought to stand if I wanted you to notice me without appearing to try." Phoebe watched the girl's fingers knot together. "Did you want the introduction?" she asked. The girl hesitated. At first, Mrs. Hensley looked at her. "Clara." The name slipped out naturally, and the girl gave her mother a tired glance. "I did, Mama. I thought if I met him properly, perhaps I would know whether I liked him. Then everyone began telling me what to say before I had even seen him." Matthew lowered his gaze for a moment. Mrs. Hensley reached into her reticule. "Lord Edwin gave us this." She removed a narrow cream card and placed it on the table, without sliding it toward anyone. The number 31 had been written in the center. At the upper corner was the same small crescent notch Phoebe had seen on 47. No one touched it. Matthew leaned closer, then stopped. "May I?" Mrs. Hensley nodded. He looked without lifting the card. "Phoebe told me there was another." Mrs. Hensley turned toward her. "You have seen one like this?" Phoebe chose her words carefully. "I have been entrusted with another numbered card by a different family. It remains in my possession with their permission." She did not identify Mrs. Alderton. She did not remove slip 47 from the card case she had brought with her. Mrs. Hensley looked back at number 31. "Then we were not the only ones." "No," Matthew said. His voice had become very still. "You were not." Mrs. Hensley opened a second compartment of her reticule and drew out no paper. Instead, she looked toward the solicitor seated near the doorway, a thin, grey-haired man who had accompanied the family at her request. He opened a leather case. "Mrs. Hensley's husband asked me to retain records of several season expenses," he said. "Among them is a receipt for 35 guineas received through Lord Edwin Bramwell toward a Bramwell supper subscription." He held up the folded paper, but did not pass it across the room. Matthew asked, "Does it name me?" "No, Your Grace." "Does it promise an introduction?" "No." "Then it proves only that the payment was made." "Correct." Phoebe watched Mrs. Hensley's daughter as the solicitor spoke. The girl's face had changed. Relief did not describe it. Perhaps it was the strange comfort of hearing someone refuse to claim more certainty than the facts allowed. Matthew turned back to her. "What happened on the evening you were meant to meet me?" She swallowed. "I was taken toward the smaller supper room after the third dance. A servant told me to wait. Lady Henrietta came in and said I had been moved too early." Matthew frowned. "Moved?" Her word. "What happened then?" "She told me to remain there until you entered from the card room." The girl gave a small, embarrassed laugh that contained no humor. "I had practiced 3 sentences. I kept repeating them so I wouldn't forget." Matthew's jaw tightened. "And when I entered, you looked at me as if you already knew why I was there." The room went quiet. The girl stared at her hands. "I thought you despised me before I spoke." Matthew inhaled. Phoebe saw the impulse in him, the old instinct to answer quickly, to make the pain smaller because he could not bear the shape of it. He turned his head toward her. He did not speak. The question passed between them in silence. "Should I answer now?" Phoebe looked at Mrs. Hensley's daughter. The girl had finished. Phoebe gave the smallest nod. Matthew turned back. "I am sorry." The girl looked up. "For what?" "For assuming I understood why you were standing there." His voice held no wit. "I thought women were being pushed toward me because they wished to win something." "I did not ask whether some of you were being pushed by people who had already made promises in my name." Mrs. Hensley straightened. "You did not know?" "No. But I did know I was tired of such introductions, and I made that tiredness visible to women who may not have been responsible for them." He met the girl's eyes. "You should not have been made to feel contemptible for entering a room according to instructions someone else gave you." The girl's shoulders eased by a degree. A servant entered only after Matthew had been told that the man waiting outside was prepared to speak. The former Bramwell footman was perhaps 45, with the careful bearing of someone accustomed to appearing invisible in important rooms. He had left Bramwell's service months earlier, and now worked in another respectable household. Matthew addressed him plainly. "Tell us only what you personally remember." "Yes, Your Grace." "Did Lord Edwin Bramwell ever give you numbered instructions concerning supper guests?" "He did, sir." "What kind?" "Certain ladies were to be taken from the ballroom after particular dances. Some were shown into the smaller supper room. Others were held back until Your Grace had entered." Mrs. Hensley closed her eyes briefly. Matthew continued. "Did you see cards?" "Twice, cream cards with numbers. One had a corner cut like a little moon." Phoebe felt every person in the room become more attentive. "And Lady Henrietta. She changed the order sometimes. Once she said one young lady should wait because another was to be brought through first." "Did she say why?" "Only that the earlier place had already been settled." The footman hesitated. "I never saw money change hands, Your Grace." "Then you will not be asked to claim that you did." The man's relief was immediate. After he left, Mrs. Hensley said quietly, "There is another family." Phoebe looked at her. "You are certain?" "I heard the mother complain that their daughter had been given number 63 and then kept waiting most of an evening. I do not know whether they paid." Matthew asked, "Will they speak?" "Not yet." Phoebe answered before anyone could suggest otherwise. "Then they are not pressed." Matthew looked toward her, then nodded. No 31 remained in Mrs. Hensley's possession when she left. The solicitor kept the receipt. Slip 47 remained with Phoebe. Nothing changed hands, yet the pattern had become harder to deny. That evening at Bramwell House, Henrietta stood beside her brother in the empty receiving room while servants prepared for another supper. "Mrs. Hensley spoke to Cottesham today," Edwin said. Henrietta's fan snapped shut. "And the card? She still has 31. Does Phoebe know?" "Almost certainly." Henrietta stared toward the doors, through which ambitious mothers had entered all season believing proximity could be managed. "Then we don't need to prove Phoebe is lying." Edwin looked at her. Henrietta's expression had gone cold. "We need London to believe she's the one controlling access now." On the 8th June, Phoebe learned how quickly a lie could become respectable. Once enough anxious people repeated it in lowered voices. The supper was held at the Mayfair house of a Viscountess whose invitations were prized because she seated rivals near enough to entertain one another and far enough to avoid open warfare. Phoebe arrived with her older married relation shortly before 9 and had barely exchanged 3 greetings when a woman in plum silk approached with the fixed smile of someone determined not to be embarrassed. "Miss Wainwright, may I have a word?" Phoebe recognized her from 2 assemblies, but knew neither her daughter nor her household well. "Of course." The woman lowered her voice, though not enough to prevent the nearest guests from hearing. "I was told matters had changed regarding His Grace." Phoebe's attention sharpened. What matters? The private introductions. A second mother, standing only a few feet away, turned at once. The first woman continued. "Lord Edwin's man said that because the Duke of Cottesham has shown you particular attention, requests must now pass through your influence." Phoebe stared at her. "My influence for supper placements." The second mother moved closer. "Then perhaps you can explain whether the 30 guineas already paid will still be honoured." Conversation thinned around them. Phoebe felt the room notice before she fully understood the design. "I have never received money from you," she said, "or from anyone else for an introduction to His Grace, but Lord Edwin's arrangement was already made." The woman said, "We were told the original payment would count toward whatever new arrangement you preferred." A third mother joined them, older than the others and visibly uncomfortable. "My daughter has been waiting nearly a fortnight. We were told Miss Wainwright now determined which ladies might be brought into His Grace's company privately." The first woman gave a small, embarrassed laugh. "I thought perhaps you had become more useful than Lady Henrietta." The words were meant lightly. They landed heavily. Phoebe kept her face still. "Who told you that I controlled introductions? It was understood." "By whom?" "Lord Edwin's people. His people are not mine." The second mother's colour rose. "Then where is my money?" "I do not know." Phoebe's voice remained calm. "But I know where it did not go." Several guests had stopped pretending not to listen. The older mother looked stricken. "You mean you received nothing?" "Nothing. Then someone has made fools of us." Before Phoebe could answer, Lady Henrietta Bramwell appeared at the edge of the gathering in pale ivory silk, concern arranged upon her face with such perfection that Phoebe almost admired the craftsmanship. "Good heavens! What has happened?" No one answered immediately. Henrietta looked from the mothers to Phoebe, allowing confusion to become troubled comprehension. "Surely there has been some misunderstanding." "There has," Phoebe said. "Several families have been told I control access to His Grace." Henrietta's eyes widened. "You!" It was a small word and an excellent performance. The first mother flushed. "We were told arrangements now passed through Miss Wainwright, because His Grace's attention had shifted. Henrietta lifted one hand to her throat. I cannot imagine Miss Wainwright would trade upon the Duke's name. The defense was so carefully phrased that it planted the accusation more efficiently than a direct attack. A gentleman nearby stopped in the act of lifting his wine. Someone behind Phoebe whispered. The older mother looked from Henrietta to Phoebe. Then you did not ask Lord Edwin to collect payments? No. Or promise private introductions? No. Or say His Grace would receive certain daughters if their families had already subscribed? No. Phoebe saw Edwin across the room beside a baronet. He appeared absorbed in conversation, yet his gaze rested on the group. Now she understood what Henrietta had meant on the 2nd of June. They did not need London to believe the old scheme was innocent. They needed London to believe Phoebe had inherited it. A male voice behind the mothers said, "Nor has Miss Wainwright ever made such a request of me." Matthew had entered the circle without flourish. The room altered around his presence. He looked first at Phoebe, not at Henrietta, not at the accusing women. At Phoebe, there was no doubt in his face. The certainty of that struck her more deeply than she wanted it to. "Your Grace," Henrietta said softly, "I fear someone has used your name most improperly, so it appears." Matthew turned toward the mothers. "Miss Wainwright has never asked me to arrange an introduction, private supper, paid placement, or anything remotely resembling commerce in my company." One woman exhaled in relief. Another looked more ashamed than before. "Then we were lied to," the older mother whispered. Phoebe thought Matthew would ask the next necessary question. Who had collected the money? Who had told them Phoebe now controlled access? Why had the story changed only after Mrs. Hensley spoke? His gaze moved briefly toward Edwin. Then a familiar instinct crossed his face. Phoebe saw it a fraction too late. Matthew smiled. "If Miss Wainwright has begun selling my company, I confess she neglected to inform the merchandise." Laughter broke across the group. It came first from two gentlemen grateful for permission to stop being uncomfortable. A dowager joined them, then several others. The accusation lost its immediate force beneath the joke. So did the women who had believed it. The first mother in plum silk laughed reflexively because everyone else did. The sound lasted barely 2 seconds. Then she looked around and realized what the room found amusing. Her mouth closed. Color flooded her face. She took one step backward and folded her hands tightly at her waist. The second mother stared at the floor. The older woman looked as though she wished to disappear entirely. Phoebe watched all three reactions. Matthew's smile faded. Henrietta's did not. Edwin turned away. Supper was announced before anyone could force the conversation back toward money. The room moved gratefully toward seating, carrying the joke with it. Phoebe endured the meal because leaving at once would have created a different story. She answered when spoken to. She ate little. Across the table, Matthew looked toward her twice. She did not meet his eyes. After the ladies withdrew, Phoebe stood near an open doorway with her older married relation, close enough to satisfy every requirement of propriety. Matthew approached alone. "Miss Wainwright." His voice held none of the ease it had carried earlier. "Your Grace, you are angry." "Yes, I believed you." Phoebe looked at him then. "I know." The answer stopped him. "Then tell me what I did." "You made them laugh." "At the accusation." "At the women." Matthew went very still. Phoebe glanced toward the mother in plum silk, who stood beside a card table, pretending to study a score sheet. She came to me believing she had paid for something. Perhaps she should have questioned it. Perhaps ambition helped persuade her. But when you made the room laugh, she became ridiculous before anyone asked who had taken her money. Matthew's jaw tightened. That was not my intention. I know. You know. Yes, that is why it matters. His expression changed. Phoebe continued, quieter now. You made the lie look absurd. You did not make them understand the harm. The words settled between them. Matthew glanced toward the women, then back at Phoebe. I thought I was protecting you. You were. She did not soften the answer. And you protected me by making it easy for everyone to believe I was the sensible woman, and they were foolish enough to deserve what happened. He said nothing. 6 days ago, you apologized to Mrs. Hensley's daughter because you had mistaken fear for ambition. I remember. Tonight you gave the room permission to make the same mistake. The truth struck cleanly. Matthew lowered his gaze for one moment. You are right. Phoebe had expected defense, perhaps even wit. His surrender did not repair the injury. That is not enough yet. No. His voice was quiet. It isn't. He moved one step closer, instinctively, as if proximity might bridge what language could not. Phoebe raised one hand between them, not sharply, simply clearly. Matthew stopped at once. His hands remained at his sides. The obedience hurt in a different way, because it reminded her why she had begun to trust him. Music began in the adjoining room. Matthew looked toward the doorway, then back to her. Miss Wainwright, may I ask you for the next dance? There was no expectation in the question, only regret and a hope he had no right to disguise. Phoebe met his eyes. No, Your Grace. He absorbed the answer without flinching. Then he bowed. I understand. Phoebe watched him step away and knew he did not understand yet. For the first time since he had crossed a ballroom to reach her, she was the one insisting on the distance between them. On the morning of the 9th of June, Phoebe learned that Lord Edwin Bramwell had begun offering money to make memory disappear. Mrs. Alderton arrived before 11, her daughter beside her, and indignation, giving both women more color than fear, had managed a fortnight earlier. Phoebe received them in the drawing-room of her London residence, with her older married relation present near the window. No one touched the tea. Mrs. Alderton removed her gloves, finger by finger. Lord Edwin sent a man to our house this morning. Phoebe's expression sharpened. What did he want? To return the 40 guineas. Her daughter gave a short, bitter laugh. How generous of him, Mrs. Alderton continued. His man said there had been an unfortunate misunderstanding regarding the nature of the Bramwell supper subscription. If we accepted the money back and considered the matter concluded, Lord Edwin would be pleased to put the confusion behind us. Did he ask for slip 47? Phoebe asked. Not directly. Did he mention it? He said any Bramwell property connected to the misunderstanding should naturally be returned. Phoebe's gaze moved briefly toward the writing desk. Slip 47 remained secure in her own card case, exactly where Mrs. Alderton and her daughter had placed it under Phoebe's protection on the 19th of May. And what did you tell his man? That we would answer later. Mrs. Alderton's daughter leaned forward. Lady Henrietta spoke to me yesterday as well. Phoebe looked at her. Where? At Lady Harbury's morning call. She was perfectly kind. The girl's mouth tightened. That was the worst part. What did she say? That she hoped this unfortunate business would not damage my prospects. Then she mentioned 3 houses where I had hoped to receive invitations. Mrs. Alderton closed her eyes for a moment. She did not threaten us. She did not need to, Phoebe said. The young woman nodded. She said respectable hostesses dislike controversy around unmarried daughters. The words sat heavily in the room because they were not entirely false. Society did punish women for being connected to scandal. even when scandal had first been manufactured around them. Phoebe understood then what made Henrietta more dangerous than Edwin. Edwin offered money. Henrietta offered social survival. "You are not the only family being approached," Phoebe said. Mrs. Alderton looked up sharply. "You know that. Mrs. Hensley has also been pressured to treat everything as a misunderstanding." Phoebe did not disclose details that were not hers to give. "I do not yet know how many others." Mrs. Alderton's daughter looked at her mother. "Then they are frightened." "Yes," Phoebe said, "which means they believe scrutiny of the payments is becoming more dangerous than the payments themselves." Mrs. Alderton sat very still. "Miss Wainwright, there is something else." "Yes, you could use 47. Phoebe said nothing. "You could show it publicly," Mrs. Alderton continued. "You could explain when we gave it to you. That would prove you were not selling introductions at the supper last night." Phoebe understood the temptation instantly. Slip 47 could do more than answer rumor. Mrs. Alderton and her daughter could confirm its transfer on the 19th of May. Matthew could confirm Phoebe had shown it to him on the 23rd of May. Long before anyone accused her of controlling access, the card could protect her reputation quickly. It could also force a frightened young woman's payment, ambition, panic, and retreat into public conversation before she had chosen that cost. Phoebe looked at the daughter. "Do you want me to show it?" The girl opened her mouth, then stopped. Mrs. Alderton looked from one to the other. "It might save you." "That was not my question." The daughter's hands tightened together. "I don't know. Then I will not use it." Mrs. Alderton stared at her. "But people are saying dreadful things about you." "Yes, and you have the means to answer them." "I have the means to answer them by making your daughter explain herself before she is ready." Phoebe's voice remained calm. "That is not the same thing." The girl looked at her with something close to disbelief. "You would let people think badly of you, for a time." "Why?" Phoebe considered the answer. "Because if I clear my name by proving another woman was foolish enough to be manipulated, then I have learned nothing from what happened last night." Mrs. Alderton's daughter lowered her gaze. "I was foolish." "No." Phoebe did not soften the word with false comfort. "You made a decision under pressure, and then changed your mind when you understood what it cost you. Those are not the same thing." Mrs. Alderton drew a slow breath. "Then what will you do? Find out whether other families wish to speak for themselves." The daughter looked up. "And if they do not, then they do not." Phoebe's answer came at once. "I will not replace one kind of pressure with another." By noon, the Aldertons had gone. Phoebe was still standing beside the writing desk when a servant entered carrying a calling card. The name on it made something inside her tighten despite herself. Matthew Montford, Duke of Cottesham. Beneath the card lay a short note. Phoebe read it once, then again. He asked for 10 minutes. No explanation enclosed, no flowers, no promise that he could fix anything. Only a request to speak at whatever hour she permitted and under whatever conditions she chose. Her older married relation watched from across the room. "Will you receive him?" "For 10 minutes." Matthew arrived at 3. He bowed, remained standing until invited to sit, and made no attempt to use humor against the tension between them. "Thank you for seeing me." "You asked for 10 minutes." "I know." Phoebe folded her hands in her lap. "Why are you here?" Matthew's expression remained steady. "Because I have been thinking about the woman in plum silk." That answer surprised her. "Not about what was said about me. That, too. But you were right. I cleared you by turning the room away from the people who had been lied to." Phoebe waited. Matthew continued. I told myself the joke was aimed at the accusation. Intent is a comfortable defense when consequences belong to someone else. The words were better than apology alone. They were still not enough. And what do you intend to do now? That depends on what you need from me. No. Phoebe's voice sharpened slightly. That is still too easy. Matthew went quiet. Explain. If all you learn is how to behave in a way that pleases me, then I become the exception again. The one sensible woman you respect while everyone else remains foolish enough to deserve your contempt. His face tightened. I do not think that anymore, not consciously. The accuracy of that struck him. Phoebe continued before the conversation could widen into another moral debate. I need you to understand one thing. I will not help expose the Bramwells if the method is to save my reputation by humiliating the women they used. Agreed. Do not agree because agreement brings you back into this room. Matthew absorbed that without protest. Then what would prove I understand? Time. The word cost her more than she expected. And behavior when I am not there to reward it. His eyes held hers. You are asking me not to call. Yes, for how long? Until you understand why last night was more than unfortunate phrasing. Matthew's jaw moved once. He did not bargain. All right. Phoebe had expected disappointment. She had not expected obedience to hurt. He rose. If Lord Edwin or Lady Henrietta use my name directly against you again, may I at least be informed? If it concerns your name, yes. If it concerns only my reputation, I will decide what you need to know. A faint trace of the man who liked sharp answers returned to his eyes. That seems severe. It is meant to be. Then I suppose I should respect the craftsmanship. Phoebe almost smiled, but did not. Matthew bowed. He made no move toward her hand. Good afternoon, Miss Wainwright. Your Grace. After he left, the room felt too quiet. Phoebe disliked the emptiness because it proved that affection had grown even while trust had become more difficult. She allowed herself exactly 1 minute to feel it. Then she sat at the writing desk. Slip 47 remained untouched in its case. Phoebe drew out a fresh sheet of paper instead. She thought of Mrs. Alderton's daughter, of Mrs. Hensley's daughter, of the mother who had laughed at Matthew's joke and then realized she was the object of it. She dipped her pen. My dear Mrs. Alderton, she began, though the woman had left only hours earlier. The letter was not a summons, an accusation, or a request for evidence. Phoebe chose each word slowly. What happened to you was not foolishness. If you wish to speak, I will stand with you. By the morning of the 14th of June, Phoebe had received enough replies to understand that fear did not make women silent in the same way. Some wrote immediately, some delayed. One sent a note so brief that it contained only 3 sentences and an apology for not being braver. Another woman asked whether speaking publicly would damage her niece more than remaining quiet. Phoebe answered each letter separately and promised no result she could not guarantee. By noon, the drawing room of her London residence held Mrs. Alderton and her daughter, Mrs. Hensley, with her daughter Clara, 2 other mothers, and 1 aunt who had come without the young woman she represented. Phoebe's older married relation remained nearby, giving the gathering the ordinary respectability of a morning call rather than the atmosphere of a tribunal. That mattered. So did the absence of any duke. Matthew had not been invited. Phoebe had asked him for distance, and thus far he had given it without complaint, flowers, messages, or attempts to make obedience look romantic. She noticed that more than she wished to. Slip 47 remained secured in Phoebe's card case. Mrs. Hensley had brought number 31, but kept it in her own reticule. The family associated with number 63 had sent word that they might attend later, though the daughter was uncertain whether she could bear to speak. Phoebe waited until everyone was settled before beginning. "I asked you here for one reason," she said, "not to decide what anyone must do, but to make certain no family has to decide alone." Mrs. Alderton's daughter watched her carefully. Phoebe continued, "If we speak publicly, we must be exact. No guessing about what Lord Edwin intended. No claiming Lady Henrietta took money if none of us saw her take it. No saying His Grace promised affection, marriage, or favour, because we have no evidence that he did." One of the mothers frowned. "That makes the story sound weaker. It makes the truth stronger." Phoebe looked around the room, and there are 3 rules I will not bend. If you choose to speak, you speak only about what happened to you. You keep your own card, receipt, or letter. And if you decide not to speak at all, no one in this room will pressure you. The aunt near the fireplace lowered her eyes. "My niece has a numbered card." Several women turned toward her. "She will not come forward." Mrs. Hensley opened her mouth, then closed it. Phoebe answered first. "Then she will not be asked again." The aunt looked up. "Even if her card would help." "Yes, you don't need to know the number, not unless she wishes to tell us." The woman's face changed slowly, tension leaving it by degrees. "Thank you." Silence followed. Then the mother seated beside Mrs. Alderton shifted forward. She had attended the supper on the 8th of June and had been among those who confronted Phoebe. Her cheeks coloured as she spoke. "I had planned to remain silent." Phoebe did not interrupt. "I thought, if I admitted what happened, people would say I was foolish for believing Lord Edwin." She glanced toward the aunt. "But if you truly mean that no one will be forced, then I think I would rather speak than spend another season wondering who else was told the same thing." Phoebe held her gaze. "Are you certain?" "No." A nervous laugh escaped the woman, "but I wish to do it anyway." That answer moved through the room more deeply than certainty might have done. Mrs. Alderton's daughter reached for her mother's hand. Clara Hensley sat straighter. Phoebe understood then that courage was becoming possible precisely because refusal remained permitted. "Bramwell House is holding a reception on the 24th, she said. "If we speak, I think it should be there." Mrs. Hensley looked startled. In their own house, the arrangements were managed through their rooms, their servants, and their invitations. The accusation against me also began inside the same social circle. I do not want anyone whispering afterward that we hid behind a private drawing room. "And the cards?" Clara asked. "You keep yours." Phoebe touched her own closed card case. "Mrs. Alderton and her daughter entrusted 47 to me. I will not display it publicly unless they both give permission." Mrs. Alderton looked at her daughter. The young woman went pale. For several seconds no one spoke. Then she said, "I want people to know I didn't simply lose my nerve." Her mother's hand tightened around hers. "You don't owe anyone that explanation," Phoebe said. "I know," the girl swallowed, "but I want to give it." Phoebe waited. "Then do I have your permission to show 47 if it becomes necessary?" "Yes." Phoebe turned to Mrs. Alderton. "And yours?" "Yes," the answer came with visible difficulty, but it came freely. Mrs. Hensley touched her reticule. 31 stays with us. Exactly. And the receipt? With your solicitor. He has agreed to attend if required. Then he identifies only what it records." Phoebe's tone remained firm. Nothing more. The room settled into something that was not confidence, but was stronger than isolated shame. Before they left, Phoebe told each family they could change their minds at any time. One woman immediately said she might. Phoebe answered, "Then you may." By 4 o'clock, the house had become quiet again. A servant brought Matthew's calling card and a short note. Phoebe read it standing beside the writing desk. He did not presume the distance had ended. He asked whether she would permit a formal call and added that he would accept silence as an answer. Her older, married relation watched Phoebe fold the note. "Will you receive him?" "Yes. You sound as though that surprises you." "It does." Matthew arrived at 5. He bowed to Phoebe's relation, then to Phoebe, and remained standing until invited to sit. There was no smile designed to make the last week disappear. "Thank you for receiving me. You asked properly. I have been practicing." Phoebe almost smiled, but the memory of the 8th June held her expression steady. Matthew noticed. "I came to apologize." "To me?" "Yes." "Then you still have not understood all of it." He went still. "Tell me." Phoebe studied him. "If your apology ends with me, I become the exception again." Matthew did not answer immediately. She continued. "You believed me that night. That mattered. But the women who accused me had already been lied to, moved through rooms, told where to stand, told what to say, and then laughed at when the arrangement became visible. If you apologize only because I was hurt, then nothing changes for them." Matthew lowered his gaze for one moment. "You are right." Phoebe let the words pass without rewarding them. "Several families met here this morning." His attention sharpened, but he did not ask for names. That restraint pleased her. "Some will speak at Bramwell House on the 24th. Some will not. Each person keeps her own evidence. No one is surrendering anything to me. What do you want me to do? Nothing before they speak. Nothing. Do not confront Edwin. Do not warn Henrietta. Do not summon servants. Do not arrive intending to rescue anyone." A flicker of discomfort crossed his face, and when it begins, Phoebe leaned slightly forward. "Do not stand in front of us." Her voice was quiet. "Listen until it is your turn to speak." Matthew held her gaze. The old version of him might have answered with a line clever enough to make the request sound unnecessary. This man did not. "I will." Phoebe believed him enough to be frightened by how much that mattered. Matthew rose when the call reached its proper end. He made no attempt to touch her, no request for another dance, no suggestion that obedience deserved affection. At the door, he paused. "Miss Wainwright." "Your Grace, I do not know yet what I can repair." His expression was unguarded. "But I know I must stop asking whether I was misunderstood and begin asking whom I failed to understand." Phoebe felt the answer settle somewhere deep and inconvenient. She gave him only a small nod. Matthew bowed and left. On the writing desk behind her lay 6 replies from women who had once believed their shame belonged only to them. In 10 days, some of them would carry that shame back into Bramwell House and give it another name. On the 18th of June, Matthew Montford stood before a small group of women whose good opinion had never mattered to him until he understood how carelessly he had helped wound it. The gathering took place in a respectable morning room lent by one of the affected families, neutral ground that belonged neither to House Montford nor House Bramwell. Mrs. Alderton sat beside her daughter near the window. Mrs. Hensley and Clara occupied the sofa opposite them. 2 other women had agreed to attend. Phoebe sat beside her older married relation, not at Matthew's side and not behind him. He had asked whether she wanted him to speak. She had said yes. Now the room waited. Matthew had prepared several versions of what he intended to say. Every one of them had sounded too polished by the time he arrived. He abandoned them all. "No one had the right to sell access to me," he began. "Lord Edwin Bramwell had no authority to accept money. in exchange for introductions, and Lady Henrietta had no authority to make any woman believe my attention could be arranged through her favour. Mrs. Hensley lowered her gaze. Clara did not, Matthew continued. But that is not the only reason I asked to speak to you. His voice carried evenly, without the ease he once used to control a room. For years, women were placed in my path by mothers, hostesses, relatives, and acquaintances. I came to resent it. Then I made that resentment convenient. I decided that every woman who appeared before me was ambitious, foolish, or willing to be part of the performance. Mrs. Alderton's daughter looked toward him. Matthew met her eyes. That judgment was lazy. Worse, it was cruel. Silence followed. Phoebe felt the room absorb the words without being told what to feel about them. Matthew did not rush to fill the quiet. At the supper on the 8th June, Miss Wainwright was falsely accused of trading upon my name. I believed her immediately. His gaze moved briefly toward Phoebe, then away again. But I answered the accusation with a joke, because that is what I have done whenever a room became uncomfortable. The joke protected her from the accusation and humiliated several of you in the process. The woman who had worn plum silk that evening shifted in her chair. Matthew turned toward her. I made it easier for people to laugh at women who had already been deceived. I am sorry. He stopped there. No flourish followed. No promise that his title could restore everything. Mrs. Alderton's daughter was the first to speak. Did you truly think we were all trying to trap you? Her mother touched her sleeve, but the girl kept her gaze on Matthew. Yes, he said. The honesty changed the room more than denial would have. For a long time I did. Clara's fingers tightened together. And now? Matthew took one breath before answering. Now I know that some of you were trapped as well. The older woman in plum silk gave a faint, bitter laugh. That doesn't make us innocent. No. Matthew's voice remained steady. Some families wanted advantage. Some may still have wanted a title more than they cared who I was. But ambition does not justify deceit, and it did not justify my contempt. Phoebe looked down for a moment. He had finally separated two truths he once treated as one. A woman could want something foolishly and still deserve not to be manipulated. A duke could resent being pursued and still be responsible for the cruelty of his response. Mrs. Hensley said, "What do you expect from us now, Your Grace?" Matthew looked toward Phoebe before answering. Not for rescue. Not even for approval. He was checking the order she had asked him to respect. Phoebe gave a small nod. "Nothing you do not choose," he said. "You keep your own cards. You keep your own receipts. If you decide not to speak at Bramwell House on the 24th, no one will compel you. If you do speak, I will not interrupt before you are finished." Clara studied him. "And if Lord Edwin denies everything, then he may deny it after you have been heard." Mrs. Alderton's daughter asked, and Lady Henrietta the same. The woman in plum silk looked at Phoebe. "You told him not to stand in front of us." Matthew answered before Phoebe could. "She did. And you agreed?" "I did." Something in the woman's face softened, though not enough to become forgiveness. That seemed right. The gathering ended without applause, tears, or declarations. One family left still uncertain whether they would appear at Bramwell House. Phoebe considered that a success. Courage had not become another obligation. Matthew remained near the door as the last visitors departed. He clearly expected to leave with them. Phoebe's older married relation adjusted one glove and said, with suspicious innocence, "I believe I left my shawl in the adjoining room." Phoebe looked at the shawl draped over the woman's own arm. Her relation looked down, appeared to notice it for the first time, and added, Then, perhaps, I left my good sense there instead. She moved into the adjoining room, leaving the door open. Matthew stood several feet from Phoebe. "Was that sufficient?" he asked. "You are asking whether you passed an examination. I am trying not to." "Poorly." A flicker of humor touched his face, then disappeared. "Then let me ask differently. Did I say what needed to be said?" Phoebe considered him. "Yes." Relief crossed his expression. "That does not mean everything is repaired. I know. Do you? More than I did." The answer was simple enough to feel honest. Phoebe folded her hands loosely before her. "What changed?" Matthew looked toward the open doorway where her relation remained within sight. "The morning after you asked me not to call, I wanted to send explanations." Phoebe almost smiled. "Only explanations? Flowers? Invitations? Perhaps some dramatic act of usefulness I would later regret." "That sounds more like you." It did. His mouth softened. "Then I realized that if I tried to shorten the distance because waiting was uncomfortable, I would prove you right." Again, Phoebe said nothing. Matthew continued, "I have spent years using wit because it gave me control. If I made people laugh first, no one could ask whether I was lonely, frightened, or simply tired of being treated like a title with a pulse." The admission came more quietly than his apology had. "At first I thought restraint meant saying nothing clever. It does not. What does it mean? Sometimes it means accepting that I do not get to determine when another person is ready for me." The room seemed smaller suddenly. Phoebe looked at his hands. They remained at his sides. "That sounds uncomfortable." "It is appalling." She smiled despite herself. Matthew's expression warmed at once, but he did not step closer. "There you are. Do not become pleased with yourself." "I wouldn't dare." The contraction sounded natural and unguarded. For several seconds, neither spoke. The silence no longer had the sharpness of Part 7. It held uncertainty, but not fear. Matthew lifted one hand, then stopped before extending it fully. "May I?" Phoebe knew what he meant. This was not the first time he had asked permission to touch her. It was different now, because she understood what accepting would mean. Not forgiveness complete, not courtship restored, only a freely chosen piece of trust. Phoebe placed her hand in his. Matthew's fingers closed gently around hers. He did not pull her nearer. He simply held her hand between them. The contact lasted through several quiet breaths, longer than the brief touch at Montford House had. Warmth spread through her glove into her palm. Matthew's expression changed, as though restraint required effort he considered worth making. "You once told me you would rather remain unmarried than audition for a life," he said. "I remember. I think I spent years doing the opposite, refusing every audition before anyone could decide I was not worth choosing." Phoebe looked at him. The truth in that was too close to his parents, too close to the man who had built humor into armor. "That sounds lonely." It was. He did not soften it. Phoebe tightened her fingers around his. The movement was small. Matthew felt it. His eyes lowered to their joined hands, then returned to her face. He looked as though he might say something larger. Phoebe saw the words gather and then stop. He released a slow breath instead. She understood why. A confession now would make apology feel like a road toward reward. He was finally refusing the shortcut. "Thank you," he said. "For what?" "For choosing this much." Phoebe held his hand one moment longer, then released him of her own accord. Matthew let her go at once. Her relation reappeared from the adjoining room with no shawl and no explanation. Before Matthew could take his leave, a servant entered, carrying a folded note addressed to Phoebe. "This came from Mrs. Hensley's solicitor, miss." Phoebe broke the seal. The message was brief. The solicitor had heard, through another client connected to Bramwell Entertainments, that Lady Henrietta now knew several affected families intended to attend the reception together on the 24th of June. More importantly, Henrietta had specifically asked whether any of them still possessed their numbered cards. Phoebe looked up. Matthew read nothing from the paper because she had not offered it, but he saw the change in her face. "What is it?" he asked. Phoebe folded the note. "Henrietta knows we are coming." Matthew's expression hardened. How much does she know? Enough to be afraid of what happens if more than one number appears in the same room. On the 22nd June, 2 days before the Bramwell reception, Phoebe learned that courage became more difficult once everyone knew exactly when it would be required. The morning began with confirmations rather than speeches. Mrs. Alderton came first with her daughter and repeated, without prompting, that Phoebe might display slip 47 publicly if the moment required it. Mrs. Hensley sent word that number 31 would remain in her family's possession until they chose to show it themselves. The family connected to number 63 had decided to attend. Their daughter had not promised to speak, and Phoebe had not asked her to. Mrs. Hensley's solicitor confirmed that he would bring the receipt, recording 35 guineas received through Lord Edwin Bramwell toward a Bramwell subscription. The former Bramwell footman sent a separate message agreeing to state only what he had personally witnessed about numbered cards and movement between rooms. Nothing had been gathered into one convenient pile. No card had changed hands. No receipt had been surrendered. By noon, the entire plan could have been summarized in a single sentence. People would bring their own truth and decide for themselves whether to speak it. Phoebe preferred it that way. She had just closed her correspondence box when a servant entered carrying a card. Her older married relation, seated near the window, looked at the name and immediately frowned. Lord Edwin Bramwell. Phoebe took the card. "Did he ask whether I was receiving?" "He said the matter was urgent, miss." Her relation folded her embroidery. "You don't have to see him." "I know." Phoebe looked at the cream card in her hand, then toward the writing desk where her own card case rested. Slip 47 remained inside it, untouched, but I think I should. Edwin entered 5 minutes later with the polished composure of a man determined to treat danger as a misunderstanding of etiquette. He bowed to Phoebe, acknowledged her relation, and waited until invited to sit. "Miss Wainwright, thank you for receiving me. You said the matter was urgent. It is." He placed his gloves across one knee. "I understand several families intend to attend my sister's reception on Wednesday carrying numbered cards." Phoebe did not ask who had told him. Part of his advantage came from making other people chase the machinery behind every rumor. "Some families intend to attend," she said. "What they carry is their affair." Edwin smiled faintly, still careful. "It has proved useful. Then let us both be careful." His tone remained pleasant. "You are about to expose unmarried women to exactly the kind of scrutiny you claim to oppose." Phoebe studied him. "Is that why you came? Because someone ought to say it plainly. Then say it." Edwin leaned slightly forward. "London will not hear that these women were manipulated. London will hear that mothers paid money to place daughters near a duke. It will hear that young ladies rehearsed conversations, waited in supper rooms, and allowed themselves to be moved about like pieces on a board." His expression sharpened. "And society will not punish me for that as severely as it punishes them." The cruelty of the statement lay in how much truth it contained. Phoebe felt her stomach tighten. Edwin saw it. You know I am right. I know society can be cruel. Then stop this. Because society might be cruel again? Because you cannot control what happens once those cards are shown. His voice softened into false reasonableness. There is another way. Phoebe said nothing. Edwin continued. The subscriptions can be returned. Quietly. Mrs. Alderton receives her 40 guineas. Mrs. Hensley receives her 35. Other families can be dealt with in the same manner where records exist. In exchange for silence. In exchange for discretion. Those are not always different words. His mouth tightened. And your own reputation need not suffer. My sister can make it understood that the rumor concerning you was mistaken. Phoebe almost laughed. How generous. You were never meant to be injured by this. Only useful. Edwin's eyes cooled. Do not make this personal. You used my name to redirect suspicion after Mrs. Hensley spoke to His Grace. You cannot prove I did. No. Phoebe's answer was immediate. And I will not claim what I cannot prove. That unsettled him more than accusation would have, she continued. But I can ask why you are so eager to return money now, to end an unpleasant misunderstanding. Why not return it in April? He did not answer. Why not when Mrs. Alderton's daughter refused the introduction? Because no complaint had been made. Exactly. Phoebe leaned back slightly. The money became a problem only when the arrangement began to be examined. Edwin's pleasant expression thinned. You imagine too much. Perhaps. Then imagine this. A young woman speaks publicly on Wednesday. By Thursday, every hostess in London knows her mother paid to place her near Cottesham. By Friday, men who might have called on her decide they prefer a wife without scandal attached to her name. Phoebe held his gaze. And what do you call the alternative? Protection. No. Her voice remained quiet. You call it protection because the women continue carrying the shame and you stop carrying the risk. Something flashed across his face. Anger, perhaps, or fear. You think you can protect them better? No. Then what exactly are you offering? Choice. Edwin gave a short, incredulous laugh. Choice will not save a reputation. Perhaps not. Phoebe's fingers rested lightly against the arm of her chair. But taking choice away is how this began. For the first time, Edwin lost the smooth rhythm of his argument. He looked toward the writing desk. His gaze paused on Phoebe's card case. Phoebe noticed. You want 47 back. It belongs to Bramwell House. Mrs. Alderton and her daughter disagree. A numbered supper token is hardly a family heirloom. Then it should not trouble you so much. His eyes snapped back to hers. Silence stretched between them. Phoebe let it. Why does the payment matter to you so much? She asked. Edwin's expression changed by a fraction. What? Not Henrietta's standing. Not merely gossip. The payments. She watched him carefully. Why are you so desperate to prevent anyone from examining them? You are reaching beyond what you know. I asked a question, and I do not owe you an answer. No. Phoebe's voice stayed even. You do not. The fact that he rose immediately afterward answered more than denial might have. He collected his gloves. You are making a mistake. Perhaps. Once this is public, you will not control what London does with it. I know, and you are willing to risk those women anyway. Phoebe stood. No, they are deciding whether to risk themselves. That is the part you still refuse to understand. Edwin bowed stiffly. A servant appeared at the doorway before he could leave. Miss Wainwright. His Grace, the Duke of Cottesham, has called. Edwin turned. Matthew stood beyond the threshold, properly announced and visibly still. His gaze moved from Edwin to Phoebe. He did not enter. He did not speak. Phoebe understood at once that he had heard only the final moments and was deliberately waiting for her to decide whether he belonged inside them. Edwin gave him a formal bow. "Your Grace," Matthew returned it. "Nothing more." Edwin looked back at Phoebe. "Wednesday will not end the way you expect. Neither did the 18th May. His expression hardened. Then he left. The front door closed below. Only then did Matthew step fully into the drawing room. He greeted Phoebe's relation before looking at Phoebe. "I heard enough to know he wanted you to stop." "He did. Do you want to tell me the rest?" "Not yet." Matthew nodded. "All right." No demand followed. No question about 47. No offer to confront Edwin in the street, summon a solicitor, or use rank to close Bramwell House before Wednesday. Phoebe felt the tension in her shoulders begin to loosen. Matthew remained several feet away. "Do you want me to stay?" he asked. The question was simple. It reached her more deeply than reassurance would have done. Phoebe looked at him and understood that for weeks he had been learning to wait while she chose. Now she wanted to choose him. "Yes." Something softened in his face, but he still did not move. Phoebe did. One step, then another. The distance between them had once been crossed by Matthew through a ballroom full of staring people. This time, Phoebe crossed it herself. She stopped close enough to see the restraint in his expression, and then placed her arms around him. For one breath, Matthew remained completely still. Then his arms came around her carefully, as though even now he would rather hold too lightly than assume too much. Phoebe rested her cheek against his chest. His breath left slowly above her hair. He did not promise that Wednesday would go well. He did not tell her not to be afraid. He simply stayed. After several quiet seconds, Phoebe tightened her arms around him. The embrace became unmistakably mutual. Matthew's hand settled between her shoulder blades without pulling her closer than she had already chosen to be. "I don't want to make this mean more than you've offered," he said softly. "Good." Her voice was muffled against his coat. "Because I haven't offered immunity from future stupidity." A quiet laugh moved through him. "A devastating limitation." Phoebe drew back enough to look at him. That was almost wit. "I am not dead. There is still time." The warmth in Matthew's eyes deepened. There were words behind it. Phoebe saw them and knew he saw that she understood. He did not speak them. Not yet. This was not the evening for promises built on fear of Wednesday. At last, Phoebe stepped back. Matthew released her immediately. She crossed to the writing desk and opened her card case. Slip 47 lay inside exactly where it belonged. Cream stock intact, handwritten number unchanged, crescent notch visible at the corner. She checked it once, then closed the case. "In 2 days," she said, "it goes back into the room that gave it meaning." On the evening of the 24th of June, Bramwell House glittered as though nothing in London had ever been bought, arranged, whispered, or regretted beneath its chandeliers. Phoebe entered beside her older married relation, not on Matthew's arm, and not under the protection of House Montford. Slip 47 rested inside her card case. The silver vinaigrette remained in her reticule. Across the receiving room, Mrs. Alderton stood with her daughter. Mrs. Hensley and Clara had arrived separately. The family connected to number 63 lingered near the far wall. The young woman pale enough that Phoebe could not tell whether she would speak at all. Mrs. Hensley's solicitor stood nearby with his leather case. The former Bramwell footman waited beyond the main drawing room until required. Matthew arrived several minutes later. The usual stir followed him. Heads turned. Lady Henrietta Bramwell stepped forward in white satin with the calm smile of a hostess who believed composure could become innocence if held long enough. Matthew bowed correctly and gave her nothing more. Then he moved to one side of the room. Phoebe saw him, he saw her. Neither approached. That, too, was part of the promise. Henrietta began directing guests towards supper as though the evening had already been saved. Phoebe crossed the room before fear could become another excuse for silence. Lady Henrietta. Henrietta turned. Miss Wainwright, how brave of you to come. I came because an accusation was made against me publicly. I intend to answer it publicly. Conversation around them weakened. Edwin appeared from beside the card-room doors. Surely not here. Here is where it belongs. Phoebe opened her card case and removed slip 47. The cream card looked almost absurdly small beneath so much candlelight. This was given to me on the 19th May by Mrs. Alderton and her daughter. Mrs. Alderton stepped forward before anyone could challenge her. That is true. Her daughter's face had gone pale, but she remained beside her mother. We paid Lord Edwin 40 guineas, Mrs. Alderton said. We were told the money was toward selected Bramwell suppers, and that my daughter would be placed where she could meet His Grace. Privately, without appearing to have been deliberately introduced, Edwin gave a controlled smile. A supper subscription. Nothing more sinister. Phoebe did not look at him. Your daughter gave me this card because Lord Edwin asked for it back after she refused to complete the arrangement. Mrs. Alderton nodded. Yes. Her daughter looked toward the surrounding guests. Her voice shook once, then steadied. I was told when to enter the smaller supper room. I was told what His Grace disliked discussing. I was told not to seem eager. A murmur moved through the room. Mrs. Hensley came forward next. She opened her reticule and removed number 31 herself. My family paid 35 guineas. She held the cream slip between two gloved fingers. The crescent notch matched 47. My daughter was also given instructions about where to wait and when His Grace would enter. Clara looked directly at Matthew for the first time that evening. He did not speak. He had promised not to. I thought he knew, she said. I thought when he looked at me as though he already understood why I was there, it meant I had failed before I spoke. Matthew's face tightened, but he remained silent. Edwin lifted one hand. 2 families paid toward private hospitality. That does not make a conspiracy, Phoebe answered calmly. No. 2 families alone do not explain everything. At the far wall, the young woman, connected to number 63, closed her eyes. Her mother whispered something. The girl shook her head, then surprised everyone by stepping forward. 3. Henrietta's gaze snapped toward her. The young woman removed another cream card from her reticule. Number 63. Same stock. Same crescent notch. I wasn't certain I would show this tonight, she said, but I was given it after my family was told I would be placed near His Grace after the second dance. Her fingers trembled, yet she kept possession of the card. Lady Henrietta told me I would have a better chance if I waited until another young woman had already been dismissed. That sentence changed the room. Not loudly, not all at once, but several women stopped looking at Phoebe and began looking at Henrietta. Henrietta's expression hardened. Young women are coached before introductions every season. Phoebe turned toward the former footman as he was admitted. Tell only what you personally saw. He swallowed. Lord Edwin gave numbered instructions to servants, miss. Certain ladies were to be moved into smaller rooms after particular dances. Cream cards were shown at the supper room entrance. And Lady Henrietta. She changed the order sometimes. Henrietta's voice sharpened. Because I was hosting. The footman looked uncomfortable. Yes, my lady, Phoebe asked. Did you ever hear her explain why? Once she said one young lady should wait because another was to be brought through first. She said the earlier place had already been settled. Did you ever see money change hands? No, miss, then you make no claim that you did. Relief flickered across his face. No, miss. Mrs. Hensley's solicitor stepped forward. He opened his leather case and removed a folded receipt. I retain a record acknowledging 35 guineas received through Lord Edwin Bramwell toward a Bramwell supper subscription. Edwin immediately seized the distinction. Exactly, a supper subscription. That is what the receipt proves, the solicitor said. Nothing more. Phoebe nodded, and nothing less. Mrs. Hensley looked at Edwin. If the money paid only for supper, why did it determine when my daughter was moved into his Grace's path? Edwin's composure slipped. It did not. Clara raised number 31. Then why was I given this? Henrietta stepped forward. Because order was needed. These girls all wanted the same thing. Her eyes flashed toward the women holding the slips. They all wanted him. Mrs. Alderton's daughter flinched. Phoebe did not. Wanting an introduction is not the same as authorizing someone to manufacture humiliation. I manufactured nothing. Henrietta's control frayed. I kept order. I knew how he disliked being pursued. I knew how women made spectacles of themselves around him. So you arranged their approaches anyway. Someone had to decide which women were suitable. Suitable for what? Henrietta looked toward Matthew, then back at Phoebe. At least I knew how to behave around him. The words fell too sharply to be recalled. Phoebe understood. So did the room. Henrietta had needed the other women to appear eager, awkward, and unsuitable because every rejection strengthened the illusion that she alone belonged naturally beside Matthew. Every woman he dismissed made your position look safer, Phoebe said. Henrietta went white. Edwin stepped in. Enough. Matthew moved at last. He did not stand in front of Phoebe. He took a place where every woman who had spoken remained visible. No, he said quietly. Not yet. The room stilled. I authorized none of these payments. I authorized no numbered introductions. I did not know these cards existed until Miss Wainwright showed me 47 on the 23 May. Edwin opened his mouth. Matthew did not allow the interruption, but my ignorance does not absolve me of every part I played. His gaze moved toward Clara, Mrs. Alderton's daughter, then the other women. For years, I treated women placed before me as though they were interchangeable. I assumed I understood their motives before they spoke. I turned refusal into entertainment because wit made contempt look charming. No one laughed. On the 8th June, when Miss Wainwright was falsely accused, I defended her with another joke. It cleared her in that moment by making several of you ridiculous. He paused. That was mine to answer for. I am sorry. Phoebe felt no triumph. Something better happened instead. The women remained standing. No duke rescued them from visibility. He simply stopped using his rank to erase it. A movement near the doorway drew attention. The Marquess of Bramwell had entered from the adjoining room during the testimony, his expression grave enough to silence even Edwin. He took the receipt from no one. He demanded no cards. He addressed his steward instead. Tomorrow morning, every supper subscription handled through my son's arrangements will be reviewed by my solicitors. Until that is complete, Edwin will have no discretion over household entertainment expenditure. Edwin's face changed. Father, not here. The Marquess's voice remained low. Not now. Social consequences began before the evening ended. Families who had once competed for Henrietta's approval departed without waiting for supper. Conversations stopped when Edwin approached. No one arrested anyone. no magistrate appeared. Nothing so dramatic was required. Trust had been the currency of the scheme, and trust was what House Bramwell lost. Phoebe stayed until the last woman who wished to speak had finished. Only afterward did she step onto the terrace beyond the long windows. Night air cooled her face. She heard Matthew approach, but he stopped several feet away. "Are you all right?" "Yes." She looked back toward the room. Not relieved exactly, no, but finished. With that part, Phoebe turned toward him. For once, no audience waited for the Duke of Cottesham to perform. Matthew looked almost uncertain. Phoebe. Her breath caught at the name. Tonight, it did not feel like presumption. "Yes, may I kiss you?" The question carried no expectation. Phoebe felt the answer before she spoke it. "Yes." Matthew stepped closer, but Phoebe closed the final distance herself. His hand rose lightly to her cheek, only after she leaned toward him. Their kiss was warm, careful, and entirely chosen. Nothing hurried it, nothing asked for more. When they parted, Matthew remained close enough that she could see how deeply restraint still mattered to him. "I love you, Phoebe." No wit, no title, no shield. Her heart tightened. "I love you too, Matthew." His eyes closed briefly, then opened. He did not ask her to marry him. He did not turn justice into a proposal. "May I court you properly now?" Phoebe smiled. "Yes." In the 5 weeks after the night at Bramwell House, Phoebe discovered that being courted by a duke was far less exhausting. When the Duke had finally learned that attention was not the same thing as entitlement, Matthew called when he said he would call. He asked before arranging drives. He did not send jewels, extravagant flowers, or gifts expensive enough to turn affection into obligation. He brought conversation instead. And when conversation became disagreement, he no longer treated wit as a weapon he had to win with. The consequences of the Bramwell scheme unfolded quietly around them. The Marquess's solicitors reviewed the supper subscriptions Lord Edwin had handled. Where records supported repayment, money was returned. Mrs. Alderton received her 40 guineas without signing any promise of silence. Mrs. Hensley's family received 35. Edwin lost discretion over household entertainments, and men who had once extended him easy credit began asking harder questions. Lady Henrietta remained socially visible, but her influence as a hostess diminished with remarkable speed. Invitations that had once depended upon her approval no longer did. More painful to her, perhaps, was the disappearance of the fiction that she possessed some private understanding with Matthew. No such understanding had ever existed, and now society knew it. Phoebe's own reputation recovered less neatly. Some people apologized. Some insisted they had never believed the rumor. Others continued whispering, because as whispering required neither courage nor evidence. Phoebe found that vindication did not mean universal approval. It meant she no longer had to shape her life around the lie. Slip 47 remained in her custody until the subscription matter was formally acknowledged by the Bramwell household, with Mrs. Alderton and her daughter's consent. Phoebe then placed the cream card inside her locked correspondence box, beside the letters connected to that spring. She did not display it. It had done its work. The silver vinaigrette remained where it had always belonged, in Phoebe's reticule, useful rather than ceremonial. Matthew's courtship was most convincing in ordinary moments. One warm afternoon near the end of July, he arrived expecting to take Phoebe and her older married relation for a drive through Hyde Park. A sudden shower had turned the streets unpleasant, and Phoebe suggested postponing. A month earlier, she suspected Matthew might have sent servants scrambling to change carriages, routes, or entire weather systems if rank had allowed it. Instead, he looked toward the dark windows and said, "What would you rather do?" Phoebe glanced at him. "You planned the afternoon?" "Yes. And you're willing to abandon it. I am trying a radical experiment in which another person may have preferences." Her relation laughed from the sofa. Phoebe folded her hands. "Dangerous. I have been warned. Then I would rather remain here and beat you at cards." Matthew looked offended. "That is not a preference. That is an attack. You may leave." "Never. My honor is engaged." He lost 3 games. More importantly, he lost them without making her victory smaller by pretending he had allowed it. Phoebe noticed that too. Later, while her relation wrote letters nearby, Matthew looked at the cards between them and said quietly, "I used to think yielding meant losing." Phoebe raised her eyes. "And now I think refusing to yield anything at all is a very lonely way to win." That was the man she chose. Near the end of July, Matthew came for an ordinary afternoon call. No musicians waited. No family council had been assembled. Tea had been poured, and Phoebe's older married relation sat near the window. With needlework she was plainly not watching. Matthew spoke of Dunley Park for several minutes, then stopped in the middle of describing a west-facing drawing room. Phoebe tilted her head. "You have forgotten the room entirely." "Completely." He set down his cup. The humor left his face, but not the warmth. "There is something I would like to ask you." "That sounds ominously formal." "I have practiced restraint for weeks. Don't ruin the effect." Phoebe smiled. "Proceed, Matthew." He stood. He did not kneel theatrically. He simply came to stand before her, close enough that she could see the nervousness he would once have hidden behind a perfect line. "I told you I loved you on the terrace at Bramwell House. I remember." "Good." I would hate to have to improve the speech. Her smile deepened, then faded as his expression grew serious. "I love the woman who did not turn when everyone else did, because someone frightened needed her more. I love the woman who told me I was wrong when it would have been easier to flatter me. I love the woman who refused to save herself by sacrificing someone else's dignity." He drew a breath. "And I love that you have never once made becoming a duchess sound more important than becoming my wife." Phoebe's throat tightened. Matthew continued, "I do not want gratitude. I do not want obedience. I do not want you to marry me because London thinks it is a triumph." His gaze held hers. "Phoebe, will you marry me because you want the life we might make together?" There it was. Not rescue, not rank, choice. Phoebe stood. "Yes." Something almost boyish crossed his face. "Yes, you heard me." "I did, but I'm discovering that repetition has virtues." She laughed. "Yes, Matthew, I will marry you." He looked at her hand, but did not take it. "May I?" "You may." He lifted her fingers and pressed a restrained kiss to her glove. Her older relation suddenly found the view outside fascinating. The banns were called on 3 successive Sundays. After the 3rd, in mid-August, Phoebe Wainwright became Phoebe Montford, Duchess of Cottesham. The wedding was neither secret nor ostentatious. It contained the formalities their positions required, without pretending that rank was the reason for the marriage. At Dunley Park, afterward, servants addressed Phoebe according to her new station. Neighbors called upon the Duchess, and household papers began arriving for her attention. Yet Matthew did not confuse partnership with absorption. Her correspondence remained her own. Her friendships remained hers. When he asked for her opinion, he learned to remain in the room when he disliked the answer. In early September, they attended a county assembly in Surrey. The room was smaller than Bramwell House, but animated by the same familiar social machinery. Mothers watched doors. Young women adjusted gloves. Gentlemen arranged themselves into conversational groups meant to look accidental. Phoebe stood near the edge of the assembly when she noticed a young woman beside an elderly aunt, breathing too quickly, while several people watched with unhelpful interest. The recognition was immediate. Phoebe opened her reticule and removed the small silver vinaigrette engraved with its worn fern. Would this help? The young woman stared at her, then nodded. Yes, Your Grace, thank you. Phoebe placed it in her hand. Take your time. Across the room, a subtle stir began near the entrance. Someone had noticed Matthew. Heads turned. Conversations shifted. The old habit of watching a duke had survived the summer. Phoebe did not turn. She waited until the young woman's breathing steadied and the vinaigrette was returned. Only then did Phoebe close the silver lid with a soft click and place it safely inside her reticule. When she finally looked across the room, Matthew was already watching her. For one instant, the months folded together. He stood as he had stood on the 18th of May, noticed by everyone, while Phoebe's attention belonged elsewhere. Then Matthew began walking toward her. Phoebe smiled. This time, she did not wait for him to cross the entire distance. She stepped forward too. People noticed. They always would. But their watching no longer determined what the moment meant. Matthew reached the center of the room just as Phoebe did. She extended her hand first. He took it. You came halfway, she said. You looked as though you might need encouragement. Cruel woman. Reformed Duke. His smile softened. I love you. Phoebe tightened her fingers around his. I love you too. Later that night, away from the assembly and every watching eye, Matthew looked at her with the familiar question in his expression before leaning closer. Phoebe answered by lifting her face to his. Their kiss was warm, brief, and easy now, no longer a beginning or a reward, but part of the life they had freely chosen. When they parted, she rested her hand against his cheek. The silver vinaigrette lay safely inside her reticule nearby. Slip 47 remained locked away, its work finished. Matthew covered Phoebe's hand with his, and neither of them had to cross the whole distance alone.